Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to another installment of Masochists Marathon, now on episode 11. So we start the episode off just checking the new oil outpost we set up last episode, just checking there's plenty of oil coming through and just trying to see if that oil balancer or liquid balancer works. It doesn't really seem to be working very well. And behold, the monstrosity that I built in between episodes. It's quite neat. I was quite happy with it. I deliberated about the design for a bit. Pondered lots, and then loaded the save that I took right at the end of recording last episode. So I spent the smallest amount of time building this stupid thing, but I did make a very obvious mistake, which I kind of wanted to leave in to teach myself a lesson for stop building ridiculous things. But we'll go into that in a second where we discover it. So I wanted to get on with blue science this episode, so I don't want to spend too long on this oil processing area, as I've kind of already done it, but something inside me just desires for oil processing to run horizontally like this and not vertically. I don't know why, it just kind of needs to. And yes, so the station's laid out with another track just above this one that's ghosted in. That's going to be the unloading area for uranium, and that will most likely travel to the west where the uranium area will be, because we've got plenty of space. Nothing's going to go there from the bus, because I've never done it before, and I'm not doing solar this series, so I'm inevitably going to be using a huge amount of nuclear power. So all that space is for that over there. So we get all the pipes in for the oil processing. I probably could have crafted some before the episode, but oh well. And the train finally comes in, and I realized the huge mistake I made. I wanted double-sided unloading for the train, and I was sort of in a dream world when I built this, and I completely forgot the new pumps don't work on both sides of the train like the old ones. So that whole bit on the opposite side was completely pointless. I mean, it was pointless anyway, even if it worked, because the train would just unload that bit quicker. It's all a bit silly, really, but I like silly sometimes. And then we put in some more storage just running along the pipes for the oil processing. I'm not really sure exactly how I want to lay the storage out for this. There's room for more. If we need it, we'll just see how it goes. But at the moment, this is way more than we need for the current income from the oil outpost. But later on, we may need a hell of a lot more with the settings of the game we're playing on. And I know there's probably too many pumps there than what we need. It's just fun to have lots of liquid pressure, isn't it? So we have that all running. We have our oil processing going. I also want to move where I was going to have cracking laid out. So it's going to go somewhere randomly in the middle here, running towards the west, and I like to lay these out in a particular way so that the tanks are exactly a chemical plant apart. When we actually lay the cracking out, you'll see why. It's just really nice and neat with the incoming and outgoing pipes for the heavy and light, and we can stick a pump in and an and or gate for stuff like lube. So we're always going to have heavy available for lube and so on and so forth, but we'll go into that when we do the cracking. I also stick in a pump to move the liquids over that we stocked up from making the laser turrets before, but I kind of forgot / didn't trust in the whole deleting the last tank and all the liquids moving along, so I decided to pump most of it, because there was quite a lot in these tanks, and I didn't want to risk it, so I just use a pump to pump it through anyway. But I kind of understand this was a little bit of a waste of time, but oh well. We saved a little bit of the heavy and light from there. And then we bring the input pipes in from the area. Again, I wasn't completely happy with that, but because I'm flipping the cracking 90 degrees from the sorting, usually I would have the cracking running from north to south, but yeah, I'm going to need a certain amount, and then I need it to be able to expand in quite a long line, and it's going to clash with things like the sulfuric acid processing and the bus if it gets quite big. But yeah, I don't really know what the maximum number of chemical plants you could have in a line with the new fluid mechanics, and I'm pretty sure we'll never actually get to that level with this setup. If I get that far into the game, we'll probably go for a more centralized style of processing laid out. So I just come and redo the pipes for the sulfuric acid processing, so it's a little bit more compact. I know this is probably overkill having the two, but I got really fussy about the ratio, and this just kind of works. So I just make this a bit more compact with the petroleum, make sure it's all hooked up okay, and then I start to get a little bit fussy with how the petroleum comes in. I attach it from there originally, but it should really be coming off the tanks. and I kind of mess around with it quite a bit. But I'll have a think about this area out of a recording, and then we'll tidy it up some other time, and I'll explain why I do whatever I do once I've decided what I'm going to do. So it was avoiding getting a load of iron for the whole time. I didn't have quite enough to make all the tanks. I want 4 storage of each kind. Plus, if we don't get cracking anytime soon, we're going to need a lot of space to back up a lot of light and heavy oil, so we can keep making petroleum for blue science, which is the next thing we're going to get on with. We're going to make some plastics. So yeah, I moved the petroleum input for the sulfuric acid yet again there. I think I may move it again. I still wasn't happy. I kind of want it running in a line of a sort of mini fluid side bus, because we're going to be using it for plastics as well. And I may at some point want to be able to control which has priority with some pumps and some circuits, but we'll come to it if we have to. And I have to move the water over as well. I don't really want that running through the station and the oil processing area. I want it running down the side along here where we can access it when we get to the more advanced oil processing, and we'll also need it for the cracking. So no doubt eventually I'll need more than one pump running down there, but that is currently the closest source of water. So I have to move the petroleum input yet again because it's in the way of one of the water inputs for the sulfuric acid. I also noticed because I had an odd number of underground pipes, and one of those was for the sulfuric acid. So we have our water hooked up to the sulfur processing, and that all kicks off nicely, so we can start making more batteries. I either put a limiter on it earlier or I do it in a minute, just so we don't have a full wooden chest of batteries. I also ghost where the belt for the batteries is going to go for when it inputs onto the main bus. And as we don't need them for blue science anymore, I think it's engines, electronic engines I'll need them for next. I can't quite remember. But we lay out roughly where we're going to have the plastics as well. Now, the battery production and plastics could probably be slightly more to the west, so we could have a bit more room for input-outputs. But to be honest, I think we're pretty much processing everything we need to here now. We'll probably have to add lube in, but I can't think of anything else off the top of my head, but we'll obviously deal with it when it comes to it. So I moved the petroleum input for one last time. It's going to be running down there. We'll also have sulfuric acid running down here and straight back up to the uranium station as well. So that's nice and close, so we don't have to pipe that too far for the uranium mining. We bring the coal up. So basically any input belts here will go on the east side of this copper and iron bit, and any stuff coming down will obviously go on the west, and then liquids can go just over one space over to me to the east, if that all makes sense. Anyway, we get the petroleum inputting for the plastic, we get the coal in. I do mess around with it a little bit, deciding whether to use long arms or not. Using these is a bit more compact. It just means we have to use underground pipes. And we have our plastic for the red circuits, which we'll get onto in a little bit. I also decide to mess around a little bit with the belt to make sure it loads on both sides. This is where adjustable inserters would be absolutely great, because I hate having to do things like this, but I want a full yellow belt. Obviously, we need a few more machines to saturate the yellow belt fully, but we'll get to it when we have to. Plenty of jobs for future me not getting as many mentions as past me. Just like now, past me expected future me, which is now present me, to clean up the mess of that edit there. That edit was because I didn't, before the episode, get prepared and just double check the ratios for blue. I didn't want to be sat around doing it in the recording, so I had a quick pause there just to make sure I had all the numbers right. And to be honest, I'll probably still get them wrong. But yeah, future me not getting many mentions, but yeah, past me's always leaving jobs for future me to clean up. Future me often becoming present me, not to confuse things, but we are all separate people. Anyway, enough about that. I could do that all day long and it would get very confusing. So we work backwards just like we did with the military science. I lay out the blue science assemblers first, just so we have our input to the science area. These are going to join the military science because we need 12 assemblers here. It meets nicely as this is longer than any of the stuff for the military science. So I don't know why I paused the game for the ratios. They're pretty easy. Initially, we're going for the one blue science pack. A second rule, which is very easy. You just need the number of assemblers for the number of items you need for that recipe. So yeah, I don't know why I really got stuck with it. It's partly because eventually I will double it up like we've done with the red and green science. It's just I didn't want to do that yet because we're very limited on our iron. I want to get the cracking and upgrades done, so I didn't want to run out of iron without doing those bits of research. So I've put out one cog assembler and two pipe assemblers which is actually too many for the 10 engine assemblers I'm putting. But because we will be doubling it up, that's enough to run 20 of them. And if I didn't do it like this, I'd have to move them all along one and stick another pipe assembler in. So we already have enough for the double amount of engines when we actually come to do it. And the way I'm laying it out meant I'd have to push it all along when we double it. So I mess around with this to begin with, and I completely don't realise that I'm doing the 2 pipes, and I work out how I'm going to do it. But yeah, it takes me a second just to tidy that up properly. But this should all work okay. But that's going to be my excuse for most of this episode for the layouts. I got a little bit confused with is that, yeah, we don't have enough iron to feed this whole thing anyway. So as soon as we've got our upgrades done for laser turrets, we will be pushing to the Iron Outpost 2, which has 1.2 million iron in it. So when I get that, I'll be a lot happier. I'm just really worried that I'm going to get to Behemoth Biters really early, and I'm going to get stuck in a stalemate, because no matter how many turrets I throw at them, without enough upgrades, they're just not going to be strong enough to get through them, and they're all just going to get blown up. It's like in the wave defense. I don't know if anyone's played it. I've mentioned it a couple of times in this series now because I'm quite enjoying it. You just have to have the upgrades or the right turrets. You have to go for flamers at one point because I found lasers weren't even strong enough for the amount of behemoths coming in. And even if you just throw loads of lasers at it, you just start running out of power. I know the wave defense is a lot limited than a planned out base, but still I am a bit concerned about that. Don't know if the wave defense is training me to be a bit more prepared for the whole thing, or it's just making me way too paranoid and I need to stop worrying. Anyway, on with the build for the blue science. So next up in the line is going to be electronic miners. Now, with this, I don't bother laying out enough cog assemblers for double the amount of electronic miners we need. So electronic miners take 2 seconds, so I need 2 of them, and I need 10 cogs every second. But there's no way a yellow belt is going to supply enough iron for these. Well, not with the amount of smelting we've got anyway. Is it yellow belt transport 13.5, or is it just 13 items per second? A cog assembler needs 4 iron plates every half a second, so that's 8. Yeah, so I'm pretty sure 1 yellow belt of iron, even if it was fully saturated, isn't enough for the 5. I said 4 earlier, I meant 5. 5 cog assemblers will make 10 iron gear wheels every second. And there's 2 assemblers. Is that right? Hopefully people will tell me in the comments where I've gone horribly wrong with the ratios, even though they are very easy. But yeah, anyway, I get this all laid out, but I kind of get a bit confused with where I'm going to shove in the extra iron belts and everything else. I'll probably redo this at some point. I've not done this layout before. Usually when I do a layout, I have an idea and then I improve it and I get better at it. But yeah, this one I'm kind of just shoving it in because it doesn't matter how well I lay it out. It's never going to get enough iron coming through with our current amount of smelting. We just need this area to produce just enough blue science for as many of the laser turret damage and speed upgrades we can afford. With blue science, there's level 3 and level 4 that we have access to before we get on to, is it purple science next? But yeah, once we've got those, we can make the push for the big iron patch. To be honest, once I've done the first damage and speed, I might just start the push next episode, and then the others can carry on while we're pushing, and hope that they don't take too long. I forgot to put in the outputs for the engines earlier, and I go and shove them in, and for some reason I go and stick outputs on the pipes and cogs. I really wasn't concentrating very much. I then take those out, but I forget to do it for the second pipe assembler, and I have to clean all that up off the belt. That felt a lot longer when past me was recording. That went a lot quicker in 3 times speed, but we dump all the extra engines into the blue science assemblers. Now onto the last ingredients for blue science, which is the advanced circuits, but not before I come and shoehorn in an extra belt for the cog assemblers, because they're pretty much hoovering up all the belt for mainly the miners. But yeah, this layout isn't really going to work, but I leave enough room when I do the advanced circuits for an extra iron belt, and I can just shoehorn beacons in at a later date, which is the gaps that I leave in between assemblers like this. I did it in Bob's, which meant the bus was absurdly long, and I'm doing it in vanilla because there's a lot less things going on the main bus. And why not plan ahead for beacons? Although thinking about that, I do actually want to move on from the main bus idea as soon as I can in this, once we get some space. So I may not even be putting beacons along here, and all this extra space is kind of a bit pointless, but it's nice to have for extra inputs if you don't get the right number of input belts, or you want to use another yellow belt instead of a red belt. or whatever. Anyway, I had this layout pretty much roughly done in my head. Thank you to Viper a few episodes ago, I can't talk again, for giving us the ratio for copper wire to red circuit assemblers. Now, I did kind of have the layout in my head, like I said, but I do have to mess around with it a little bit. But we will just make one side, and then we'll use the blueprint mirror in the picker mod. I almost forgot what the name of the mod was because it's just got so many aspects going for it now. But yeah, I do play around with it a little bit because I had the idea in my head of what I want to do. I've never actually laid it out. So I do change a few things like the input outputs I may get wrong for the wire. I do change where the wire comes on, and I end up double loading both sides of the belt just to maximize the use of the yellow belt. Plus the red long-handed inserters can actually occupy the same space for when we put the power poles in, but that doesn't happen for a little while. But while I'm doing this whole thing, I completely forget the fact we're smelting or have access to smelt a very small amount of copper. So to begin with, we get a nice half belt coming through on either side, one full yellow belt in total, which is great. We get those copper wires going and they start feeding into the red circuit assemblers. We lay our inputs for plastic because plastic is used slightly more than green circuits. So we want those a bit closer because the fast inserters will be using those. I know that's a pretty pernickety thing. I just like going by that rule. The item that's used the most gets placed closest to the assembler. But I do like this technique here for giving you access to 3 belts on one side of an assembler. I quite like this, using the underground belts. A little bit expensive for my current position, but we've got I've done some maths. We've got a bit of iron to spend. I think I have enough at the end of this episode for the upgrades. I did go through the numbers last episode of how much iron I need for the laser turret upgrades. I hope those numbers were correct. I did double check them, so they should be, but if they're not, do let me know. But we do end this episode with at least 400,000 iron at the deposit. I think it's more. It might be 450. By my math, we have enough to do those upgrades. I've lost my little note I had lying around with the numbers on. I think I've got it here. For the level 3 damage and speed upgrades for lasers, it's 97,000 iron, and then for the level 4 for both, it is 195,200. And I hope I haven't got those wrong because I just read them out again before last episode even went out. Anyway, enough rambling about that. I went on about that way too much last episode. But yeah, I think we've got enough to get the cracking in. So next episode we'll be getting some cracking done nice and quickly. Sorting out the copper, that's another problem, which we discover in a moment. Yeah, you can see just on the end of the screen there for a second, it was quite saturated. But we'll hopefully be starting the push towards iron. I'm not sure we'll make it all in next episode, unless there's other problems I find need to be dealt with before we go and do the pushing. And with the ratios for the red circuits, I'm not really looking at how many we need for blue science, because this is going to be my main red circuit production area. To saturate a full blue belt, I haven't done the math, but I'm sure it's going to need a hell of a lot of assemblers. And these input belts being full and not side loaded should mean that this column is going to end up being pretty ridiculously long. But yeah, I'm not really looking at the ratios for red circuits for blue science, because this is going to be the main production for them anyway. These will feed down onto the main bus as well as splitting off for blue science. So the area is pretty much laid out. I do move the red inserters again because to begin with I thought I won't mess around wasting time doing the poles and getting them all straight, but then as always I get a bit triggered and I mess around with those. And I think I make some copper wire to try and tidy them up, but it looks a bit better with those red long-handed inserters having their input output sorted out, although I take the blueprint with 2 of the output long-handed inserters wrong on the left-hand side, so I don't notice that straight away. So I do mess around a couple of times right up to the end of the episode trying to get these blueprints correct, because I want this in my blueprint book. But obviously anything I've got wrong with this layout, please do let me know. And we deal with that output as well going off to the bus, because we don't want to waste any at all. We want to get the laser turret damage done first, which we kick off this episode, and we'll carry on doing it next episode. And we start to get some blue science coming through any second as those red circuits feed in. Yeah, there we go. So we've got some blue science coming in on the belt. And I was going to end the episode here, so we stand here for a bit. I usually record a little bit of time at the end of the recording just to do the outro, because I never know exactly how long I'm going to take and what I want to say. But you can see at the top of the screen there, the copper belt is very thin, and that does come down eventually. But while I was sat there watching, I noticed that one of the assemblers on the right-hand side wasn't working. So we fixed that. The inserter wasn't getting any power, and we correct that on both sides. So then I take a copy of the blueprint without noticing the output on two of the assemblers on the left-hand side is incorrect. So I go through all that palaver, then I notice and I correct it, and then past me doesn't bother taking a blueprint. So I'll have to go and check that. Yet again, things being cleared up by future me from past me for present me, and then I start messing with the miners again. But anyway, enough about that. I can sort that in the next episode because it's clearly not working very well because we're not using up those yellow belts. But anyway, that's going to be all we have time for this episode. I do hope you have enjoyed. Thank you so much for watching, and please do come and join me in the next episode. Bye-bye.